Hello, and welcome. I'm Daughter of Darkness, your narrator. I'm so glad that you found your way back to my dark little corner of the universe. Tonight, I'll be regaling you with stories of people who were haunted on the job, working the night shift. It's hard enough to make a living out there without ghosts getting all up in your business. But there you have it. Bosses, co-workers, clients, and ghosts. Just one more thing to add to your worry list. But you needn't worry with me by your side. So for now, sit back, relax, let me lead the way. And let's get scared together, 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 together. I recently found some Let's Read type channels on YouTube and decided to try to write down an experience I had a few years ago, as it seemed similar to the content being posted. I'm 27, male, live in the UK with my fiancé, and currently work as a teaching assistant for teenagers with special education needs. The school is not far from Brandgate Park in Leicestershire. I've worked in a number of schools and children's homes now, and these buildings, especially the children's homes, are usually old renovated houses or halls. This particular story happened back in 2013 when I had just started working as a support worker at a care home for teenagers and young adults, ages 18 to 30, with autism, brain damage, and other challenging behaviors. The house that I worked in was pretty big. There were 2 living rooms, a large kitchen, a game room, a study, and 5 bedrooms. There was also a huge garden with a summer house that led out to acres of fields and woodland. I'd been working there for about 3 weeks and primarily worked the waking night shift. This shift ran from 10 p.m. until 8 a.m., and it was my duty to make sure all the residents were settled in for the night and to get the cleaning done before the day staff came in to take over later. I would usually get all my jobs done by 1 a.m. and spend the rest of the night listening out for anyone that woke up. I would watch TV, read my university course books, or sometimes just play games on my phone once I was finished. The residents usually slept all night. One night, a young man named James, not his actual name for legal reasons, was particularly restless. He was not very big, but he had a lot of strength behind him when he got in one of his bad moods. The slightest thing could set him off. He once threw a member of staff through a patio door because she had forgotten to put cold water in his tea before he drank it. He could not form full sentences and would communicate with fairly simple words put together in a way that he understood them. For example, he would say something like, "James make breakfast," when he wanted to make breakfast, or "James go outside" if he wanted to go out and play. He was generally pretty well behaved and could be quite funny if he wanted to be, but he was well known for his temper. At around 11 p.m., James got up and came downstairs to make a drink. I stood in the doorway and watched to make sure he didn't break anything or hurt himself, and he went back upstairs without any real bother. I sat on the top steps and kept an eye on his door for maybe 15 minutes or so, to make sure he didn't wake any of the other residents. Once he had settled in, I went back to my cleaning. The room beneath James's bedroom was a communal living room with board games, a TV, sofa, books, and stuff like that. I was in there dusting and mopping the floor when I heard something heavy drop onto the floor in the room above. I knew James was prone to temper tantrums if he got frustrated, so I went upstairs and knocked on his door. As I reached for the key to open it myself, he opened the door and looked at me. He seemed perfectly calm, and his eyes looked almost half shut, like he'd been asleep. I asked if he was okay, and he said yes and put his thumb up. This was something that he did when he was in a good mood and not stressed out at all. So I left him to it and told him to be careful, thinking that he had just knocked something over by accident. An hour or so passed, and by now I was in the kitchen cleaning the sink. I heard another bang above me, again, like something had been dropped. This time, I realized the room above the kitchen was currently empty. The house was set up for 5 residents, but there were currently only 4, and the room above me was the spare room. I immediately went up to check it out, but the room was empty. I stood there for a while, and as far as I could tell, everyone was asleep. Each resident had an alarm fitted to their door that was activated at night, so if anyone left their room, a small receiver box that the night staff carried would make a noise and the light would blink for a few seconds to indicate which door had been opened. The alarm had not gone off, so I knew that the noise was not from any of the residents. I went back to my cleaning and didn't hear anything else for the rest of the night. The following night, I got to work just before 10, and as I entered the hallway, I could tell something was wrong. James was at the bottom of the stairs, covering his ears and humming loudly, and 3 members of staff were with him. After a few minutes, he was escorted to the sitting room, and the house manager gave me the rundown of what had been going on. For the last 4 hours, James had been quite agitated, and when asked what was wrong, he kept repeating the phrase, "Sarah, little girl. Sarah, little girl." Now, this was something we had never experienced with him before, and the general conclusion was that he had seen something on TV or in a movie, and it stuck in his head and made him repeat the phrase. Once James had settled in bed, the night staff left and the other member went to sleep in the staff bedroom. I got on with my tasks and, as usual, finished up around 1 a.m. Soon after this, I went upstairs to do a quick check on all the residents. But as I got to the first floor landing, I noticed the light had been turned off. There were 2 small corridors leading to the bedrooms on the left and the right-hand sides of the staircase. James's room was on the left, and the light switch was just outside of his room. I turned the corner to flick on the switch, and there, in the darkness, in complete silence, was James. He stood in the corner, completely naked, with his eyes as wide as he could possibly hold them. Now, I'm a big guy, 6'3" and weigh about 220 pounds, but at that moment, I was really creeped out. I spoke calmly to James, and I asked him what was going on, and for a while, he said nothing at all. Then, as I turned the lights back on, he let out an ear-piercing scream and started slapping himself about the face. The sleep-in staff woke up at this point and helped me to calm down the situation and get James back into bed, before reassuring the other residents that everything was fine. After that night, I had 4 days off. My shift pattern was 7 days on, 2 days off, followed by 8 days on and 4 days off. I was relieved that this incident had happened just before my time off began. I got back to work the following week and was told that the situation with James, talking about the little girl, had gotten a lot worse. He would spend hours staring out the window that overlooked the garden, saying, "Little girl, where are you? Little girl." And no one knew where he had heard that phrase. That night, around 3 a.m., the alarm went off to say that the door in room number 5, the spare room, had been opened. Now, this instantly seemed a bit weird, as the door to the spare room has always been kept locked because it was being used for storage at the time. I went up to investigate and found James, stood in the room, in the dark. He didn't seem to notice me entering and was just standing there whispering, "Where are you?" over and over again. I gently touched his shoulder and said something like, "Come on, mate, let's get you back to bed. It's late." James turned around and started heading back to his room, and for a second I was relieved. But then, as I locked the door to the spare room, he screamed out, "Oh no!" and started pummeling the door with both fists. As he did this, the alarm went off to indicate that the front door downstairs had been opened. The only people with the key to the front door were myself and the house manager. The door had 4 locks on it, 2 that required a key and 2 that required an electronic ID card. It was now 3:25 a.m., and the manager never came in before 8 a.m. So I presumed that it had been some kind of a mistake and continued to defuse the situation with James. He finally calmed down and went back to his room, so I went downstairs to check the front door. To my surprise, it was wide open. I shut it immediately and started checking every room in the house in case somebody had gotten in. I then checked on each of the residents to make sure they were still in their room and in the house. Everything was fine. The next night, everything was calm until 2 a.m., when one of the other residents, Connor, got up and said that someone was tapping on his window. I guessed that he must have been dreaming, as his room is on the 3rd floor of the house, and the window is at least 25 feet from the ground. I went back up to his room with him to assure him that I would check on the window. Sure enough, it was shut, and the security lock that prevents it from being opened wide enough for anyone to fit through it was still sealed. As he got back into bed, I heard footsteps on the stairs outside of his room. He froze for a second and looked at me with an expression of pure panic on his face. I opened the door to see who was there, but nobody was there. Connor was clearly scared by this. "Is he back?" My blood ran cold and I said, "Is who back? What do you mean?" Connor looked past me over my shoulder. Then he sank down into his bed, pulling the duvet up to his mouth. I turned around to see what he was looking at, but still, no one was there. "Tell him to go away," Connor said in a hushed, scared voice. I tried to reassure him that no one was there, and I left his bedside lamp on before leaving the room. I went downstairs and sat outside on the patio with a cup of coffee. It was the middle of January and around -2 degrees outside, but I felt like I just had to get out of that house for a while. After about 40 minutes, I went back inside and washed my cup in the sink, dried it, and put it back in the cupboard. Beneath the cupboard was a locked, secure drawer where all the sharp knives were kept until needed. The drawer was opened slightly. This was obviously a major issue, as none of the residents were allowed access to the knife drawer without supervision. I counted the knives and realized that one was missing. So I woke up the sleep-in staff member and told her the situation, and we began a search. Nearly 2 hours later, we still hadn't found that missing knife, so we decided to just keep our guard up and make sure that none of the residents were hiding it. 2 hours later, at 5:30 a.m., the alarm sounded. It was the door to the spare room. Again. I went up to check it out and found that the door was still locked. How could the alarm have been activated by a door opening if the door was closed and still locked? I went inside and turned the light on. To this day, I still have no explanation for what I found, and I think about this incident often. The bed had been pushed from its usual place and was up against the wall, and the wardrobe doors were open. There were screws and nails all over the floor, but nothing was broken. But the most disturbing part? In the middle of the room, there was a children's doll, a gold bracelet, and the missing knife from the kitchen. The doll was an old-style baby doll. My guess is that it was made in the 50s from the style of clothing and the overall look. And the bracelet was simple-looking but very old. I left everything as it was and reported it to the manager as soon as she arrived. No one ever claimed that bracelet belonged to them, and it was taken to a charity shop along with the doll. After the doll and bracelet were removed from the house, James seemed to calm down, and he never mentioned a little girl or stood around in the dark again. I still don't have an explanation for everything that happened, and sometimes I think it was just a combination of strange behavior from a young autistic guy and the fact that the house was old. But, on the other hand, a lot of stuff happened that I can't explain logically. My only regret now is that the doll and bracelet are gone and can't be examined or identified. Was it paranormal? Who knows? But now I work the day shift, and I do not plan on working the night shift again anytime soon. This is my first Reddit post. It may not be dramatic or particularly scary to some people, but I wanted to share this experience anyway. I recently got a job in a hotel downtown from where I live. I never worked in the hotel industry before, so I had no idea what to expect. The time between applying for the job and being hired was less than 24 hours, which made me a little nervous, but I'd been looking for several months and couldn't find anything, so I thought I'd take a chance. The hotel is about 150 years old and has plenty of character. Behind the front desk, there are places where the wallpaper is torn away, revealing the psychedelic wallpaper from what I can only guess to be the 1960s. We're talking bright pink, neon green, hookah-induced visions type of wallpaper. The walls in the upper floors are painted a bright orange and yellow, and the hallways give off a shining kind of feel. I'll elaborate on that later. My manager is a young Chinese man in his mid-20s, only 5 years or so older than me. The man who owns the building is also Chinese, and literally a walking stereotype. The owner is friendly and kind to his employees, but he also doesn't really care about keeping the hotel up to par. I recently learned that he also owns one of the more run-down shopping centers in town. So this might explain the less than 5-star quality of the hotel. It's probably about a 1.5 star, in my opinion. Some people describe the place as quaint, unique, full of character, while others say it's outdated or disappointing. As a history enthusiast, I would agree that the place is full of character, but I also think the owner should be a little more concerned about keeping the place clean. There are a lot of problems in this hotel, including mice, broken toilets, falling ceiling tiles, leaks, and other maintenance nightmares. The fancier rooms on the upper floors have real fireplaces in them, so that adds the risk of fires at the hand of careless guests. Mice are a common problem, and I'm thankful the guests don't see all the dusty traps filled with dead rodents in the basement. But by far, the most interesting aspect of this hotel is that it's supposed to be haunted. There are 2 ghosts that have been reported in the building, as well as the adjoining pub next door. Back when the hotel was first built, it had a reputation of being a complete dive. A lady, now known as Lady Churchill, died in the hotel, and her spirit supposedly lingers on in room 49. Guests will occasionally smell her perfume or see her face in the mirror. One of the more frightening stories included someone opening the door only to have Lady Churchill fly at them in a fury. On my first day, when my boss gave me a tour around the hotel, he pointed out that haunted room to me. Lady Churchill also has been spotted by the fireplace in the adjoining pub next door, arguing with her boyfriend, the other resident ghost, Brady. Brady was stabbed to death in the basement stairwell. That stairwell is no longer in use, as it leads directly to the street into the basement. Instead, it's used to store extra chairs and miscellaneous items. The lights in that stairwell are never turned on, which adds even more to the creep factor. I work the day shift from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. I have to check the entire hotel by myself in search of homeless people sleeping in the back stairwell or trying to get in through the basement. And I am not an intimidating person. I'm a short female, not physically fit, and a bit too friendly for my own good. If I did find somebody hiding out in the hotel, what am I supposed to do about it? I'm not sure which creeps me out more, the fact that I'm going around looking for people who shouldn't be there, or the idea that I have to walk through dark and silent areas of the hotel that are known to be haunted, all by myself. My sweep of the hotel includes all 4 floors of guest rooms, the kitchen, the back stairwell, the basement stairwell, and the basement itself. To give you some context, the back stairwell serves as a fire escape connecting all the floors together. It goes straight down to street level. It's always cold and echoey in there, and as I said before, it's full of dead mice. When I was first told about the haunted stairwell, I mistakenly thought they meant the fire escape stairs, as they also go down to the basement level. The 4 floors of guest rooms, in all their overlook hotel shining glory, are shaped like a square horseshoe, which means more than enough blind corners where creepy twins might suddenly appear. Lady Churchill's haunted room is at the end of one of those halls, around one of those blind corners, and yes, I do think about that every time I search the hotel. There is an elevator and an interior stairwell, the one guests are supposed to use. Behind the elevator is an old connecting hallway that basically serves no purpose anymore. In the past, it may have been useful, but now it just serves as a secret passageway that goes behind the elevator and comes out on the other end of the horseshoe. This hallway especially needs to be searched for the homeless people, drunks, and random people having sex. The basement is by far the creepiest part of the hotel. To get there, you can either take the elevator or go through the pub and down the stairs. I prefer to go through the pub because there are some fascinating black and white photos, a la The Shining, from when the hotel was first built, and I love to look at them. It's also the best place to see the age of the brick foundation. Anyway, the basement is used for storing beer kegs, firewood, planter pots, housekeeping items, and maintenance tools, among other things. It's usually deserted, but now that I know the dark, unused basement stairway is where Brady's spirit is supposed to be, I think I'll spend a little less time down there. This week is my 2nd week of work, and my boss has put me on the afternoon and evening shift, just so I can get a sense of what it's like, in case I need to cover for anybody in the future. Yesterday was my first late shift, and in that time, I learned a whole bunch of things I didn't want to know from the lady that I worked with. This woman, I'll call her Peggy, has been at the hotel for 14 years. She's seen all there is to see and is well known for her stories. I've listened to some of these stories and, honestly, part of me thinks she's full of shit. But the other part is going to cautiously believe her, on the off chance that some of these stories are true. Here are just some of the things that I learned about the hotel in the span of just one shift. Number 1. The man I'm replacing was not actually fired for chronic lateness, as my boss told me, but instead for sexual harassment. The head of housekeeping, a man that I get along with very well, is a friend of his. Number 2. The day before, Peggy caught a drug addict rooting around in the private back office after hours. We looked over the security footage and he was definitely looking for something. We now keep the office doors locked at all times. Number 3. There were 2 guests several years ago that stayed in the hotel, and the next day, they robbed a jewelry store downtown and fled back to the hotel with everything that they'd stolen. There was a massive police standoff, SWAT teams on the roof and all. There's actually a news article about it online, otherwise I never would have believed it. Number 4. The bedrock of the hotel can be found in the boiler room. There's a slight gap that has since been filled in on the top right corner that connects it directly out to the street. One time, Peggy went down to that boiler room to find a man halfway through the gap, head first, trying to get in because he, quote, wanted to know what was down there, unquote. That image terrifies me. In the span of that one night shift, an alarm went off in the basement, the police showed up to the pub, and a guest verbally abused the day staff over the fact that we had no shuttle to drive him to the hospital. No, not an ambulance, a hotel shuttle. I guess taking the bus was beneath him. And at my bus stop, after my shift, a man was shooting up in public. My city has a drug epidemic going on at the moment. My bus took half an hour to arrive, and when I got off at my stop, it was as foggy as Silent Hill. I felt as though I should be looking around for Michael Myers or Jason Voorhees. That's one night shift down. I have another tonight and one more the day after. If anything else interesting happens, I'll keep you folks updated. I mostly just wanted to get all of this off my chest. It's amazing how different the hotel is after 3 p.m. Much louder, that's for sure, thanks to the pub on one side and a bar on the other. Everyone I've gotten to know during my first week of work has already gone home, leaving me with drunks, strangers, and Peggy's crazy stories. One thing's for sure, after 3 nights of this, I'll never complain about getting up early again. I've worked in multiple prisons, but for privacy reasons, I won't name them. I wasn't at this particular prison for very long, but due to the notoriety of this specific inmate, it would give away the prison's location. But still, I won't name it. I worked in the prison that holds Florida's death row at one point in my career, before transferring to a prison a lot closer to home. Because I'm female, they really didn't want me on the row unless it was for training. During my training, I was given a tour of death row and the death chambers. Our death chamber is comprised of 2 rooms. One holds the gurney for a lethal injection, and one holds the electric chair. I wasn't technically working on the row, but we did have an inmate who was on death watch, and there needed to be an officer in there 24/7. Death watch is when an inmate is moved to the final holding cell until their execution. It's where they receive their last meal and things like that. An officer came in to relieve me for my 15-minute break, and due to the size of the prison, I couldn't walk out and have a cigarette and be back in time. So I decided to explore a little bit and satisfy my morbid curiosity. I walked into the death room with the gurney and saw it from the window and felt my heart sink, knowing that the inmate that I was watching over would be strapped down to it in just a few hours' time. Turns out he wasn't. He ended up getting a stay of execution. Next, I went into the room with the electric chair, and when I did, something felt really off. I felt a mix of feelings: despair, anxiety. My mind was racing. I felt uneasy and turned around to leave when I heard,
"You didn't think I'd be back, huh?"
I felt like I was in the Arctic tundra. I began to shiver. My spine was tingling. I was frozen in fear because I knew I had entered that chamber alone. I forced myself to turn back around and had my pepper spray in hand, just in case I ran into an inmate that somehow escaped from the row. Well, I did run into an inmate, but definitely not the one I was expecting. I was staring dead into the face of Ted Bundy, sitting in the chair that he had died in. I couldn't move. I couldn't speak. My heart was racing and I felt like fainting. I began to back away, slowly. It was like he was alive. He wasn't see-through. The only way that I would have known that this was an apparition was because I knew for a fact that he had been executed in the 1980s. Still frozen in fear, I watched what appeared to be an alive Ted Bundy disappear, like he had never been there in the first place. I got the hell out of there and was unable to speak to anyone for the rest of the day. And this is a reply from Reddit user Just Jane in the comments section. I can imagine that if anyone would stick around after death, it would be Bundy. He tried everything to put off his sentence, and I'm sure he was terrified. Being able to kill so many girls without a hint of remorse and dying himself were two entirely different scenarios for him. I became aware of him when he was first arrested in Florida. I was of the age and fit the description of his victims in Washington State. My sister lived in Pensacola, where he was arrested for the final time. The most frightening fact for me is that after seeing his picture on the 6 o'clock news, before he finally admitted who he really was, I knew I would have fallen for his fake injury ruse and could easily have been a victim. I had been in Pensacola the year before. He killed the Chi Omega girls on my 24th birthday. Before Bundy, the term serial killer didn't exist. He holds the distinction of being the first named as one. Scary, but not surprising to me, anyway. Great post. A good way to forget about the virus for a day. Thanks. I will never work a night shift again. The first and only time that I ever saw a ghost, a dead person, a demon, or whatever it is you want to call it, was exactly a year ago today. I had gotten my bachelor's degree after 3 years of studying social welfare and was working the night shift at a group home for teens with substance abuse problems. My workplace was located in a big old house, which was almost scary quiet during the nighttime. I often felt anxious being there. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the job and spending time with the teens, but working the overnight shift scared me. I usually started my shift at 6 p.m. We would make dinner, I'd help out with homework, and we'd talk for hours, dealing with all sorts of issues, until I went to bed in the office, usually around 1 a.m. The night this happened, I fell asleep at 1:30 a.m., woke up 2 hours later, thirsty, and went to get a glass of water. I walked down the stairs, entered the common room, and then walked by a big window in the living room. I looked out into the gray, cloudy sky when I saw death hanging from a tree. Brown, rotting flesh in the shape of a face. I rubbed my eyes and looked again, and the flesh was still there. I couldn't move, breathe, or blink my eyes for a few seconds. I was absolutely terrified. After a while, I found the strength to move my legs and walked into the office again. I locked the door and sat there all night, and when the sun finally peeked out, I managed to move my legs and go look out of the window again. No rotting flesh this time, just a normal tree with green leaves. A few days after the incident, I told my boss I didn't want to work the night shift anymore, citing lack of sleep. I didn't want to tell her the real reason, since she would probably think I was mad. Maybe I was. Maybe I am. Was this just a nightmare? Maybe. But what if it wasn't? Can anyone relate? Have you seen something like this before? And this is yet another reply from Reddit user Just Jane. Jane was a busy little bee that day, wasn't she? Posting in the comments. I hope you all learn a lesson from Jane and take a cue from her. Post in the comments. It's quite appreciated. Shout out to you, Jane. I hope you post in my comments as well. And now, without any further ado, here's Jane. I worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift in a hospital for years, and I never saw anything, though I did get weird feelings in certain areas of the hospital. When I started there, we had no intensive care unit, and the ER was only open until 11 p.m. This was in the early 1970s. Over the years, as the hospital began to attract younger doctors, they built on and expanded the hospital. When I left in 1995, it was a modern A+++ hospital and trauma center. I was nursing supervisor on nights for the last 12 years that I worked there. In the brand new surgery suite, I felt a strong sense of being watched and a general feeling of unrest every time I went in there. I had to get meds and equipment from areas of the hospital close to the night shift for the 24-hour staff. Needless to say, I tried every other department before forcing myself to go into that surgery unit. It was creepy. I think hospitals and homes, like the one you worked in, attract or hold on to negative experiences more easily than happy places. Glad you're okay now. Well, kids, it's closing time. Your shift has come to an end, and it's time to go home, crawl into bed, to sleep, perchance, to dream, or have a nightmare. But before you go, please hit that subscription button, click the notification bell, share, like, and comment below, like Just Jane, so that we can grow this channel and continue to meet like this every week. I do so enjoy our meetings, don't you? So, until next time, stay scared, my friends.